Over 2,000 years ago, at a time when humanity was still grappling with some of the most fundamental questions about the universe, a city in Egypt stood as a beacon of knowledge and culture. This city was Alexandria, named after its legendary founder, Alexander the Great, and it soon became the epicenter of intellectual activity, drawing scholars, philosophers, and visionaries from every corner of the known world. At the heart of this magnificent city was its crowning jewel, the Library of Alexandria, the most ambitious institution of knowledge ever conceived in the ancient world. Imagine the scene: the Mediterranean Sea stretching out like an endless horizon, a trade route alive with the bustle of merchants, sailors, and travelers from lands as far apart as Greece, Persia, and India. Along the shores, Alexandria rises from the landscape like a vision of progress and power, its white marble buildings gleaming in the sunlight. It is a city born from the conquests of Alexander the Great, yet its legacy would be one of peaceful discovery rather than military might. Founded in 331 BCE, Alexandria was meticulously planned to reflect the ambition of its founder. Alexander, even in his youth, had been obsessed with the idea of creating a city that would unite the cultures of the East and West. His vision was to bridge the vast and diverse civilizations that he had encountered during his campaigns, blending the wisdom of the Greeks with the mysticism of the Egyptians, the ingenuity of the Persians, and the ancient knowledge of the Babylonians. When Alexander died prematurely, his dream didn't perish. His successors, particularly the Ptolemaic dynasty that ruled Egypt after his death, took up his mantle. The Ptolemies envisioned Alexandria not just as a political capital, but as a cultural and intellectual hub, a place where the brightest minds could gather, share ideas, and push the boundaries of human understanding. Under Ptolemy I and his successors, the city flourished, attracting thinkers from across the ancient world. But the jewel in Alexandria's crown was to be its library, a place where all the knowledge of the world would be collected, preserved, and expanded. The Library of Alexandria would not only be a storehouse of wisdom, it would be a living institution, a place where inquiry, debate, and discovery were woven into the fabric of daily life. To understand the true genius of the Library of Alexandria, we must first recognize how radical its vision was for the time. Libraries were not a new concept in the ancient world. Babylon, Sumer, and even Greece had their own repositories of knowledge, but the scale and ambition of the Library of Alexandria were unprecedented. The early Ptolemaic rulers, particularly Ptolemy I and his son Ptolemy II, did not simply want a place to store scrolls and books. They wanted a place that would capture every piece of knowledge from every corner of the world. They dreamed of a collection so vast and comprehensive that it would rival the intellectual traditions of any culture that had ever existed. And so the library's mission was not merely to collect books, but to actively seek out knowledge. Ptolemy's agents traveled far and wide, scouring the markets of Athens, Rhodes, and Antioch for rare scrolls. They copied manuscripts, traded with other kingdoms, and even intercepted ships arriving at the port of Alexandria to search their holds for texts. Every book, every piece of knowledge was seen as a treasure to be acquired, copied, and preserved. Ptolemy II even passed a decree that any book brought into Alexandria had to be handed over to the library's scribes to be copied. The original would be kept in the library, and the owner would receive a duplicate. This policy may have been controversial, but it speaks to the unrelenting desire of the Ptolemies to gather every possible scrap of human wisdom within their city's walls. Yet, the library was far more than just a repository. It was designed to be a space where scholars from different lands and disciplines could meet, exchange ideas, and collaborate. The library was part of the larger institution known as the Museum, a temple to the Muses, the goddesses of inspiration in the arts and sciences. The museum was a place of learning, much like a modern university. It housed lecture halls, gardens, reading rooms, and even living quarters for resident scholars. There was a dining hall where ideas were exchanged over meals, and students came from near and far to study under the great minds of the day. This institution was unique in the ancient world. Never before had there been such an expansive, systematic effort to collect and cultivate knowledge across so many disciplines: mathematics, astronomy, medicine, literature, philosophy, and more. In this way, the Library of Alexandria became a symbol not just of knowledge, but of the very human desire to understand the world and our place in it. One of the most remarkable aspects of the Library of Alexandria was its ability to bring together scholars from diverse cultures and intellectual traditions. In a time when the world was deeply divided by language, religion, and political boundaries, the library stood as a rare space where these differences could be set aside in the pursuit of knowledge. The scholars who gathered in Alexandria came from all walks of life. There were Greek philosophers, Egyptian priests, Jewish scribes, Persian astronomers, and Indian mathematicians. Each brought with them the intellectual traditions of their own culture, and in the library's halls, these ideas were debated, compared, and synthesized. This blending of different traditions was one of the library's greatest strengths. It was a place where the philosophies of Plato and Aristotle could be discussed alongside the teachings of Zoroaster, where Egyptian medicine could be studied next to Greek anatomy, and where Babylonian astronomy could be compared to the movements of the stars, as seen by Persian scholars. Imagine walking through the library's marble halls, past towering columns and rooms filled with the soft glow of oil lamps. You would hear conversations in a dozen different languages, see scholars poring over ancient scrolls, and witness debates that spanned the heavens and the earth. The air would be thick with the scent of old papyrus and ink, the sound of soft murmurs, and the occasional heated exchange between two scholars, passionately defending their theories. It was here, in this melting pot of ideas, that some of the most groundbreaking discoveries of the ancient world were made. The library was a place where intellectual boundaries were constantly being pushed, where new fields of study were born, and where old assumptions were challenged in the light of fresh evidence. In many ways, Alexandria represented the best of what humanity could achieve when we come together in the spirit of curiosity and collaboration. It was a place that embodied the belief that knowledge has the power to unite us, that by understanding the world, we can also understand each other. The story of the Library of Alexandria is in many ways the story of human ambition itself. It is a tale of the heights we can reach when we dare to dream big, to gather the best of our collective knowledge, and to push the boundaries of what is possible. Yet, there is also a fragility to this ambition. The same qualities that made Alexandria so great, its openness, its diversity, and its relentless pursuit of knowledge, also made it vulnerable. For all its grandeur, the library and the city it resided in were not immune to the forces of politics, war, and cultural shifts that would one day lead to their downfall. The story of Alexandria is a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge is a noble but delicate endeavor. Knowledge, like the institutions that preserve it, must be constantly nurtured, protected, and renewed. Without vigilance, even the greatest achievements can be undone. But for a time, Alexandria stood as a shining example of what humanity could achieve when we embraced our shared desire to understand the world. Its library was a symbol of hope, a testament to the belief that through knowledge we could transcend the divisions of culture, language, and geography and come together to build a better future. To truly grasp the monumental legacy of the Library of Alexandria, we must step into the shoes of the men and women whose ideas and discoveries shaped its corridors. Alexandria was more than just a city of books and scrolls. It was a living, breathing intellectual hub that attracted some of the greatest minds the world has ever known. These individuals came not only to study the knowledge that had been amassed, but also to add to it, transforming the library into a place where ideas were born, questioned, and pushed to their absolute limits. Imagine, if you can, the type of thinkers who walked the hallowed halls of this great library. They weren't simply readers or scribes. They were dreamers, innovators, and revolutionaries of thought. These were individuals who looked at the world around them and asked questions that had never been asked before, who dared to challenge the wisdom of the past and offer new explanations for the mysteries of the universe. One such individual was Euclid, a name that still echoes through the halls of mathematics today. Euclid was a Greek mathematician whose groundbreaking work laid the foundation for geometry as we know it. It was here, within the walls of the Library of Alexandria, that he wrote his seminal work, Elements, a text that has shaped the study of geometry for over 2,000 years. Euclid's brilliance wasn't just in his ability to solve problems, it was in his ability to systematically organize mathematical thought. In Elements, he distilled centuries of mathematical knowledge into a coherent, logical framework that could be used to solve problems, not just in theory, but in practical applications as well. The clarity and precision of his work allowed future generations to build upon it, making Euclid one of the most influential mathematicians in history. But Euclid didn't work in isolation. His presence in Alexandria meant that he had access to the minds of other scholars, philosophers, and scientists who were also pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. Imagine the lively debates that must have taken place between these thinkers, discussions about the nature of space, the properties of numbers, and the infinite complexities of geometry. Alexandria was not just a place of study. It was a place where ideas collided and fused, giving birth to entirely new ways of thinking. Now, picture a young scholar entering the library for the first time, eager to learn from the great Euclid. Perhaps they had spent years studying the rudiments of mathematics in their homeland, but nothing could have prepared them for the intellectual rigor and excitement of Alexandria. As they walked through the marble halls, they would have felt the pulse of discovery in the air, the quiet hum of scrolls being unrolled, the murmur of scholars engaged in deep conversation, the sharp sound of a stylus against a wax tablet. This was a place where knowledge wasn't just preserved, it was actively pursued, debated, and expanded. Another towering figure who frequented Alexandria's intellectual circles was Archimedes, one of history's greatest inventors and scientists. Though he spent much of his life in his native city of Syracuse, Archimedes maintained a close connection with the scholars of Alexandria, regularly corresponding with them and exchanging ideas. Archimedes is perhaps best known for his contributions to the fields of physics and engineering. His inventions, such as the Archimedean screw used for raising water, and his work on the principles of levers, pulleys, and buoyancy, revolutionized how people understood mechanics and physical laws. But Archimedes was more than just an inventor. He was also a deeply curious mathematician. His work on the approximation of pi, and his development of methods to calculate areas and volumes of irregular shapes paved the way for integral calculus, a branch of mathematics that wouldn't be formally developed until nearly 2,000 years later. One of the most famous stories about Archimedes, which illustrates both his brilliance and his eccentricity, is the tale of his Eureka moment. The story goes that Archimedes was tasked with determining whether a crown made for the king of Syracuse was made of pure gold, or if the goldsmith had adulterated it with silver. After pondering the problem for days, Archimedes realized the solution while taking a bath. He noticed that as he entered the water level rose, and he understood that the volume of water displaced could be used to determine the crown's density and thus its purity. Overcome with excitement, Archimedes reportedly leapt from the bath and ran naked through the streets shouting, "Eureka! Eureka! I have found it! I have found it!" This anecdote, while entertaining, highlights the essence of Archimedes' genius, his ability to see the world in new and innovative ways. He saw connections between physical phenomena that others had missed and used those insights to solve complex problems. And it was in Alexandria, surrounded by other brilliant minds, that he was able to refine and share his ideas, contributing to a scientific tradition that would influence countless generations. No discussion of the Library of Alexandria would be complete without mentioning Eratosthenes, the polymath who served as the library's chief librarian in the 3rd century BCE. Eratosthenes was a man of many talents. He was a mathematician, geographer, astronomer, and poet. But he is perhaps best known for one of the most astonishing achievements of ancient science: calculating the circumference of the Earth with remarkable accuracy. At a time when most people believed the Earth was flat or had only a vague idea of its true size, Eratosthenes devised a method that was both elegant and simple. He knew that in the city of Syene, modern-day Aswan, the sun was directly overhead at noon during the summer solstice, meaning that it cast no shadow. However, in Alexandria, located some distance to the north, the sun did cast a shadow at the same time. Eratosthenes measured the angle of the shadow in Alexandria and used this information, along with the known distance between the two cities, to calculate the Earth's circumference. His result, approximately 40,000 kilometers, was astonishingly close to the actual value. This feat is all the more impressive when we consider the limited tools and resources Eratosthenes had at his disposal. Using nothing more than geometry and observation, he demonstrated that human ingenuity could overcome the barriers of distance and the unknown. Eratosthenes' achievement was not just a triumph of mathematics, it was a triumph of the human spirit. It showed that with curiosity, determination, and intellect, we can unravel the mysteries of the universe, even with the simplest of tools. His work laid the foundations for future generations of explorers and scientists who would continue to expand our understanding of the world and our place in it. One of the most tragic and poignant figures associated with the Library of Alexandria is Hypatia, a philosopher, mathematician, and astronomer who lived in the late 4th and early 5th centuries CE. As one of the few female scholars of her time, Hypatia's story stands out not only for her intellectual brilliance, but also for the way her life was cut short by the forces of ignorance and fanaticism. Hypatia was the daughter of Theon, a mathematician and philosopher who taught at the library. From an early age, she was immersed in the world of scholarship, and she quickly made a name for herself as a gifted teacher and thinker. Hypatia lectured on mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy, attracting students from all over the Mediterranean. She was renowned not only for her knowledge, but also for her eloquence and the clarity with which she communicated complex ideas. However, Hypatia's life took a dark turn as the political and religious climate in Alexandria grew increasingly volatile. By the 5th century, the once great city had become a battleground for various religious factions, and Hypatia, a symbol of pagan philosophy and intellectualism, found herself at the center of this conflict. In 415 CE, she was brutally murdered by a Christian mob who viewed her teachings and her influence as a threat to their authority. Hypatia's death marked a tragic turning point in the history of Alexandria. It signaled the end of an era in which the pursuit of knowledge had been valued above all else, and where different cultures and philosophies had coexisted in relative harmony. The murder of Hypatia was not just the loss of a brilliant mind, it was the loss of an ideal, a reminder of how fragile the light of reason can be in the face of ignorance and fear. What must it have been like to be in Alexandria during its golden age? Imagine the energy that filled the air. A city where the pursuit of knowledge was not just encouraged but celebrated. Picture the scholars from all over the world, drawn like moths to the flame of intellectual brilliance that radiated from the library. They came from different backgrounds, spoke different languages, and followed different traditions, but they all shared one thing in common: a burning desire to understand the world. As a young scholar in Alexandria, you might start your day in the library's reading rooms, surrounded by shelves of scrolls, each one containing the distilled wisdom of a different civilization. Perhaps you would spend hours studying the texts of Plato or Aristotle, or the ancient Egyptian medical papyri. In the afternoons, you might attend lectures or debates in the museum, where the sharpest minds would clash over questions of science, philosophy, and metaphysics. At night, as the city grew quiet, you would retire to your quarters, your mind buzzing with new ideas. And as you lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, you would feel the weight of history pressing down on you. The knowledge that you were part of something much larger than yourself. You were contributing to a tradition that stretched back thousands of years, and that would continue long after you were gone. This was the magic of Alexandria. It wasn't just a city or a library, it was a community of thinkers, united by their shared love of knowledge and their insatiable curiosity about the world. And it was this community that gave rise to some of the most important discoveries in human history. The tale of the Library of Alexandria is one of both triumph and tragedy. It stands as a monument to the heights of human intellect and ambition, but it is also a reminder of the fragility of those very same pursuits. For centuries, the library thrived as the beating heart of knowledge, the most comprehensive collection of wisdom and insight ever assembled in the ancient world. Yet, for all its grandeur, the library's fate serves as a stark warning. Knowledge, even when housed in the most fortified institutions, is vulnerable to the forces of ignorance, politics, and time. The story of the library's destruction is one steeped in mystery and myth, surrounded by conflicting accounts and theories. But one thing is certain. The loss of the Library of Alexandria represents one of the greatest intellectual tragedies in human history. There is no single agreed-upon explanation for how the Library of Alexandria met its end. In fact, it is quite possible that it did not perish in a single, cataclysmic event, but was instead subject to a slow, agonizing decline. A gradual erosion of knowledge over the centuries, with multiple factors contributing to its eventual demise. This uncertainty only adds to the tragic aura surrounding its story, as historians are left to piece together the puzzle of how one of humanity's greatest achievements could have been so thoroughly lost. One of the most popular theories attributes the library's destruction to Julius Caesar in 48 BCE. During Caesar's civil war, he found himself trapped in Alexandria. In a bid to fend off the Egyptian fleet, Caesar reportedly ordered his men to set fire to the ships in the harbor. According to some accounts, the flames spread to the city, and eventually to the library, consuming much of its priceless collection. The Roman historian Plutarch writes about this event, describing how many great books were destroyed in the ensuing fire. It is tempting to imagine the horror of that moment, the crackling of flames devouring centuries of accumulated wisdom, the helplessness of the scholars and scribes as they watched scroll after scroll turn to ash. How many brilliant ideas, how many groundbreaking discoveries were lost in that inferno? The thought is almost unbearable, a visceral reminder of how fragile the preservation of knowledge truly is. However, while the fire during Caesar's siege may have caused significant damage, it is unlikely that this event alone was responsible for the total destruction of the library. Some historians argue that the main library was not located close enough to the harbor to have been affected by the flames. This has led to the suggestion that only a portion of the library's collection, possibly housed in warehouses near the docks, was lost in this fire, while the bulk of the library remained intact for years to come. Another widely discussed theory centers on the rise of Christianity and the subsequent purges of pagan temples and institutions in the late Roman Empire. By the 4th century CE, Christianity had become the dominant religion of the empire, and many of the ancient practices, philosophies, and teachings that had once been celebrated were now seen as pagan relics, symbols of a time before the light of Christianity had spread across the world. In 391 CE, the Roman Emperor Theodosius I issued a series of decrees that led to the destruction of pagan temples throughout the empire. Among the casualties of this religious fervor was the Serapeum of Alexandria, a grand temple dedicated to the god Serapis, which also housed part of the library's collection. Christian zealots, encouraged by the local bishop, stormed the Serapeum and destroyed it, along with its scrolls, as part of an effort to cleanse the city of pagan influences. For many, this event symbolizes the tragic collision between religious dogma and intellectual freedom. It's not hard to imagine the scholars of Alexandria, who had once wandered the halls of the Serapeum, gazing in disbelief as their life's work, Scrolls that had taken decades to compile, copy, and preserve were torn apart and burned in the name of religious purity. The destruction of the Serapeum marked a decisive turning point in the city's intellectual history, signaling the end of Alexandria as a center of learning. And yet, even this event likely did not mark the final blow to the Library of Alexandria. The Serapeum was only one part of the library complex, and there are indications that other parts of the library may have continued to function, albeit in a diminished capacity, in the years following its destruction. One of the most debated and controversial theories surrounding the destruction of the Library of Alexandria comes from the early Islamic period. In 642 CE, the Muslim general Amr ibn al-As, acting under orders from Caliph Omar, conquered the city of Alexandria. According to one story, when Amr asked the caliph what to do with the vast collection of books and scrolls in the library, Omar famously responded, "If these books are in agreement with the Quran, we have no need of them, and if they are opposed to the Quran, destroy them." This statement, if true, suggests a complete disregard for the knowledge contained in the library, as if it was irrelevant or even dangerous in the eyes of the conquerors. The story goes on to claim that the books were used as fuel to heat the city's public baths for 6 months, their words and wisdom quite literally going up in smoke. However, modern historians are skeptical of this account. The story of Omar's decree does not appear in historical records until centuries after the event supposedly took place, leading many to believe that it may be a later fabrication, intended to paint the early Muslim conquerors in a negative light. Furthermore, by the time of the Islamic conquest, the Library of Alexandria may have already been in ruins, its collection dispersed or destroyed by earlier events. Whether or not the Islamic conquest played a direct role in the destruction of the library, it is clear that by the 7th century, the institution that had once been the jewel of the ancient world was no more. The books were gone, the scholars had fled or been silenced, and Alexandria's time as the intellectual capital of the Mediterranean had come to an end. While dramatic tales of fire and conquest capture the imagination, there is another, more sobering possibility, that the Library of Alexandria did not fall to a single catastrophe, but rather to a slow, gradual process of decline. Over the centuries, the political and economic fortunes of Alexandria waxed and waned, and with them, the fortunes of the library. Under the early Ptolemies, the library had enjoyed generous patronage and protection. But as the Roman Empire took control of Egypt, Alexandria's importance as a political and intellectual center diminished. The library, once the crown jewel of the city, began to suffer from neglect. Scrolls, which required careful maintenance and copying to survive the ravages of time, began to deteriorate. The scholars who had once flocked to Alexandria in search of knowledge gradually went elsewhere, as other cities and centers of learning rose to prominence. By the time of the Christian purges and the Islamic conquests, the Library of Alexandria may have already been a shadow of its former self. Its collection, once the largest in the world, could have been scattered, sold, or simply forgotten. The grand halls that had once echoed with the voices of Euclid, Archimedes, and Eratosthenes may have stood empty, their shelves bare, their purpose long abandoned. In this version of events, the library's demise is even more tragic because it was not the result of a violent attack or a deliberate act of destruction. It was the result of apathy, neglect, and the slow erosion of support for the pursuit of knowledge. In the end, the library may have perished not in flames, but in silence. It is difficult to quantify the loss that humanity suffered with the destruction of the Library of Alexandria. Estimates of the library's collection vary, but some sources suggest that it contained as many as 400,000 to 700,000 scrolls. And yet,